The gala was filled with soft lights and the sound of laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses. People moved gracefully, their dresses shimmering and suits crisp and neat. Everyone seemed to shine under the chandeliers that hung from the tall ceiling. The air smelled of expensive perfumes and the faint scent of flowers placed in golden vases around the room. The crowd was full of people who believed they had it all, yet tonight, the tension was hidden beneath the smiles and polite conversations. She entered the room with quiet confidence, her dress flowing gently as she walked. Her eyes scanned the crowd, noticing familiar faces, and she gave polite nods and small smiles. She was used to these events, yet tonight felt different. The night held a sense of something about to happen, though no one could predict what. He was already there, standing near the center of the room, talking with people who laughed at his every word. His suit was tailored perfectly, and he moved with a self-assured air that made him appear untouchable. People admired him, but some also whispered behind their hands, questioning his choices and wondering if his charm was just a mask. She approached him calmly, her steps measured, her posture straight and composed. She greeted him softly, a smile barely touching her lips. He responded with a nod and a quick smile that seemed more for the crowd than for her. As they spoke, a few eyes in the room turned toward them. Everyone knew their story. People had watched their lives unfold in the papers, in magazines, and through whispers at other social gatherings. They were a couple that seemed perfect on the surface, yet behind closed doors, things were never as simple as they appeared. Suddenly, a conversation nearby caught his attention, and he laughed louder than necessary. She followed his gaze and realized he was talking about someone else in a way that made her stomach twist. It was not just a casual conversation. The words he spoke carried an edge, a sharpness that cut deeper than she expected. People around them laughed and nodded, oblivious to the hurt that brushed past her like a cold wind. She felt a sudden heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and pain that she tried to mask with calm. He glanced at her briefly, noticing the subtle change in her expression, yet he did not pause or soften his words. Instead, he seemed to enjoy the attention, the control, the power of making her small in that grand room. She took a deep breath and reminded herself to remain composed. The gala was crowded, and there were many who would watch her reaction. She had learned over time that her strength lay in patience and grace. The room buzzed with conversation, but for her, time seemed to slow. Every laugh, every comment, every glance felt amplified. People moved around them, sipping champagne, sharing stories, and making deals that would affect their lives in ways unseen tonight. She felt a twinge of sadness mixed with a quiet anger. It was not just the words he spoke. It was the public nature of it, the display of disregard for her in front of people who had once admired them as a couple. The betrayal felt heavier because it was done where everyone could see, where every whisper and glance seemed to acknowledge her humiliation. She shifted slightly, letting her hand brush the edge of her dress, grounding herself. Her mind raced with memories of the times he had promised loyalty, of the nights they had shared laughter, and of the quiet moments that no one else would ever know. They were all there, colliding with the reality of his actions tonight. She took another step back, creating space between them without drawing attention. She kept her head high, her posture straight, but inside, her heart was breaking. He continued to talk, unaware or unconcerned with the storm he had stirred within her. The room seemed to blur around her as she focused on her breathing, on the control she could maintain over herself. A few people noticed the tension, the way her smile faltered and then returned. Subtle but enough to catch the eyes of those who knew her well. They exchanged small looks, a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. It was clear something had happened, though the details were hidden in the silence she carried so well. She moved toward the edge of the room, letting the crowd part for her. Her steps were light, yet determined, each one carrying the weight of her dignity and her unwillingness to be humiliated further. He noticed her movement and frowned, a flash of irritation crossing his face. The people around them continued their conversations, some glancing briefly at the scene unfolding but quickly returning to their own affairs. She reached a quiet corner near a large window that overlooked the city lights. She paused, taking in the view, letting the cool air from the slightly open window brush against her face. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the hurt, to acknowledge the betrayal fully. The city outside sparkled, indifferent to the personal drama inside. The lights reminded her that life moved on, that even in moments of pain, there was beauty and possibility. She straightened, inhaling deeply, and let the quiet determination settle in her chest. She would not let this moment define her, would not let the sting of betrayal steal her sense of self. She returned her gaze to the gala, observing the people who laughed, who whispered, who moved through the room as if nothing had happened. She realized that she could be stronger than the gossip, stronger than the humiliation, stronger than the man who thought his power could diminish her. She knew the night was far from over, but she also knew that she had a choice. She could leave quietly, preserve her dignity, and begin to think of the steps she would take next. The crowd, the lights, the laughter, all of it could continue without her needing to play their game. She felt a mixture of sadness, anger, and resolve, each emotion mingling to form a new sense of clarity. Slowly she turned, moving toward the exit, each step deliberate, calm, and resolute. People noticed her departure, some whispering, some staring, some pretending not to. The whispers grew as she moved through the grand hall, but she did not falter. Outside, the cool night air greeted her, wrapping around her like a protective cloak. She stepped onto the quiet street, letting the sounds of the city fill her ears. Grounding her in reality, outside the artificial glamour of the gala, she breathed in deeply, feeling a sense of release. The betrayal had been public, the humiliation sharp. Yet she carried herself with the strength that had always been hers, hidden beneath layers of expectation and society's gaze. She walked with purpose, each step taking her further from the man who had wronged her and closer to the self she needed to reclaim. The night was hers now, a quiet beginning of a journey that would not be defined by anyone else's actions. She allowed herself a small, private smile, knowing that though the world had witnessed her pain, she had also shown the world her strength. The streets were quiet, the city lights reflected in puddles from a recent rain, and for the first time that night, she felt the possibility of a new beginning. Her mind began to plan, to consider, to imagine the life she could build from this moment forward. And as she walked away from the gala, leaving behind the betrayal, the whispers, and the illusions, she carried with her a quiet power that no one in that glittering room could ever take away after the night of the gala. She returned to her home, a place that once felt warm and comforting, but now carried echoes of betrayal and disappointment. She walked through the quiet rooms, her steps careful, noticing small things that had always given her comfort. The soft couch, the kitchen table, the photographs on the wall. Each object reminded her of a life that had shifted in one sharp moment. She set down her coat and allowed herself to sit quietly, letting the emotion she had held back at the gala surface. Sadness came first, a wave that made her chest ache. She closed her eyes and let the feelings flow, acknowledging the hurt, the anger, and the confusion. She knew it was important to feel it fully, to face the pain rather than hide from it. As she sat, she thought about the years that had led to this moment, the nights spent laughing together, the quiet conversations, the dreams shared in whispers when the world was asleep. Those memories were sweet, yet now they felt distant and fragile, like glass that had been cracked but still reflected light. She realized that the life she had built with him was not gone, but it had changed forever. The betrayal had created a space, an emptiness, that she could no longer ignore. She walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, the same city she had walked through after the gala. The lights seemed calmer now, indifferent to human pain, yet comforting in their constancy. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air brush against her face, and let herself think about the future. She knew that staying in one place would not help. She needed movement, change, and purpose. She began to consider small steps, things she could do to reclaim her independence. The first step was understanding that her value was not tied to anyone else. Her confidence, intelligence, and courage were hers alone, and no one could take that away. With that thought, a new determination settled in her chest. She spent the following days reflecting, writing down her feelings, and making plans. She focused on herself, on her passions that had been set aside. Books she had always wanted to read, classes she had wanted to take, skills she had wanted to develop. Each small decision was a step toward rebuilding a life that was entirely her own. She began to reconnect with people who had supported her quietly over the years. Friends who had always believed in her, mentors who had seen her potential, and even acquaintances who recognized her strength. Their encouragement was like fuel for her spirit, reminding her that she was not alone. Slowly, she started taking tangible steps toward independence. She enrolled in a course she had long dreamed about, spending her mornings learning and expanding her knowledge. Afternoons were spent exploring small projects, things that challenged her creatively and professionally. She found satisfaction in the work itself, in the feeling that she was creating something meaningful with her own hands and mind. Nights were quieter now, spent in reflection and gentle routines that brought comfort. She allowed herself to rest fully, to dream freely, and to imagine a future where she was in control of her life. Alongside the growth, she experienced moments of doubt and fear. Memories of the past, the betrayal, and the humiliation would resurface unexpectedly. There were nights when tears came unbidden, and mornings when waking felt heavy with uncertainty. But she learned to face these moments with grace, understanding that vulnerability was not weakness. It was part of the process, part of the journey toward a stronger, more resilient self. She began to notice subtle changes in how she carried herself. Her posture became more confident, her steps more purposeful. Conversations with friends and colleagues were filled with clarity and assertiveness. She spoke her mind, shared her ideas, and allowed her opinions to be heard without hesitation. People began to notice. The quiet elegance she had always possessed now had a new depth, a sense of power that was not about wealth or status, but about integrity and self-respect. One day she received an unexpected opportunity. A friend from the past reached out, suggesting a collaboration on a project that aligned perfectly with her passions. The offer was not just professional, but personal. A chance to step into a space where her talents would shine without compromise. She considered it carefully, weighing her options and imagining the possibilities. Accepting meant taking a risk, stepping into the unknown, but she felt ready. The decision was made, and with it came a sense of excitement she had not felt in years. The project consumed her in the best way. Days were filled with creative work, strategic planning, and moments of collaboration that inspired her. She found herself learning not just from the work, but from the people around her, gaining insights and skills that were building a foundation for something far greater than she had imagined. As the weeks turned into months, she noticed the transformation in herself. The sadness from the gala had not disappeared entirely, but it had softened, placed with a quiet confidence that radiated from within. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had endured betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Her appearance reflected her inner strength. Her smile, once hesitant, now carried certainty. Her eyes shone with clarity and purpose, a reflection of the work she had done on herself. She began to reconnect with the world, attending small gatherings, networking events, and social spaces that felt authentic and meaningful. People responded to her differently now. They treated her with respect, curiosity, and admiration. She realized that the aura she carried was no longer dependent on a title or partner, but on her own accomplishments and self-assurance. Throughout this journey, she kept her past close, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of her resilience. The betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable now served as a catalyst, a turning point that pushed her toward growth she might never have pursued otherwise. She found joy in small victories, in moments of creativity, in connections with people who valued her for who she was. Each day became an opportunity to learn, grow, and shape a life that was authentic and fulfilling. As the months passed, she began to plan for the future with intentionality. She envisioned herself in spaces where her voice mattered, where her ideas could influence and inspire. She thought about ways to expand her projects, take on challenges that would test her abilities, and continue building a life that was independent and meaningful. She also allowed herself to imagine personal happiness. She recognized that joy could coexist with ambition, that love and friendship could be nurtured without compromising her sense of self. The memory of betrayal no longer dominated her thoughts. It was a chapter, important and formative, but no longer the defining story of her life. One quiet evening, she reflected on the journey she had undertaken since the gala. The woman who had walked out of that grand hall with a mix of pain and resolve was not the same woman who now looked out over the city skyline from her apartment window. She had grown, changed, and embraced a sense of freedom that was entirely her own. The sense of empowerment she felt was subtle, yet undeniable. It was not about revenge, wealth, or recognition. It was about reclaiming her life, asserting her independence, and trusting in her ability to navigate the world on her terms. She knew that challenges would continue to arise, that the path forward would have obstacles, but she felt prepared. Her confidence was rooted in experience, growth, and a deep understanding of her own worth. She took one last look at the city lights, the same ones she had admired after leaving the gala months ago. Now they seemed to shine not as distant points of beauty, but as mirrors of the possibilities she had created for herself. Her heart was lighter, her mind sharper, and her spirit stronger. She understood that the story of her life was no longer written by anyone else. It was hers to shape, with courage, grace, and determination guiding every step. And as she closed her eyes that night, she felt a quiet peace, knowing that the journey she had begun after betrayal had transformed her into a woman ready to face the world, empowered and unafraid months passed since the gala, and she had grown into a life that felt strong and deliberate. Each day was shaped by choices she made, small or large, that reminded her she could create her own path. Her mornings began with quiet reflection, moments of planning, and time spent on projects that mattered deeply to her. She no longer feared the past or the memory of betrayal, though it remained a quiet reminder of how far she had come. The world outside continued to move as it always did, the city alive with lights, sounds, and endless possibilities. She had begun to appear at events once again, but this time on her own terms, quietly commanding attention without needing to shout or display her presence. People noticed the change, the calm confidence that radiated naturally from her. At first, some thought it was simply elegance, but those who truly observed could see the strength and intelligence that had grown within her. One evening, she attended a smaller gathering, an event that was not as crowded or flashy as the gala, but held its own significance. She moved through the room with a quiet grace, her eyes meeting those who welcomed her with warmth and respect. Conversations flowed easily, not weighed down by superficiality or pretense. She engaged, listened, and shared thoughtfully. People felt her presence as genuine, inspiring, and quietly powerful. She realized that her return to the social scene did not have to mimic the grand gestures of the past. Instead, she could choose where, how, and with whom she interacted. Her life had become a reflection of her own values, and that gave her a sense of freedom she had never known before. Meanwhile, the man who had betrayed her continued his life as if nothing had changed. The gala had faded from the public eye, and he assumed she had withdrawn entirely, defeated, or resigned. But he did not know that every day she had been quietly rebuilding herself, learning, creating, and strengthening a presence that no one had expected. Rumors began to surface in subtle ways. People spoke in hushed tones about the remarkable woman who had emerged, who carried herself with poise, intelligence, and confidence that now came naturally to her. The night arrived, and she entered the venue with quiet confidence. The room was filled with familiar faces, some of whom had witnessed the events of the past, and others who had only heard whispers of her transformation. All eyes turned as she moved gracefully through the space. Conversations paused briefly, then resumed with renewed energy as people noted the remarkable presence she carried. She was no longer a woman to be pitied or overlooked. Intelligence, poise, and confidence were evident, and the room adjusted around her accordingly. She engaged in conversations, listened carefully, and shared insights that left a subtle impact on those around her. People found themselves drawn to her authenticity and strength, qualities that could not be bought or feigned. Among the crowd, he noticed her as well. The man who had betrayed her paused mid-conversation, his eyes widening slightly as he realized that the woman he had underestimated had returned, and in a way that could not be ignored. He had assumed she would disappear quietly, that the public embarrassment would define her for a long time. Instead, she had become more than he could have imagined. He watched her move through the room, confident, composed, and admired by others. The subtle shift in attention, the respect in her interactions, and the quiet authority she carried made him realize that he no longer held any power over her image or her presence. She noticed his glance, but did not respond immediately. She was focused on her own interactions, her projects, and the meaningful connections she was making. Her mind was clear, her spirit calm, and her purpose unwavering. To the next high-profile gala, she continued to prepare quietly, refining her plans for a return that would be noticed without being forced. She strategized on how to use her presence, her skills, and her new network to create an impact that was both subtle and powerful. The anticipation built not as anxiety, but as a careful and deliberate readiness. She understood that her transformation was not just for personal satisfaction, but for the statement it would make to those who had doubted or betrayed her. The world was watching, and she would step into it with the strength, intelligence, and dignity she had cultivated over the months. As the event drew near, she reflected on her journey. From the pain and humiliation of the gala, through months of quiet rebuilding and self-discovery, she had become someone who no longer needed validation from others. She had learned to trust herself, to act with intention, and to carry a presence that commanded respect naturally. The gala she would soon attend was not merely an opportunity for social visibility. It was a chance to demonstrate the culmination of her growth, the power of resilience, and the undeniable strength of someone who had taken control of her own life. And as she looked ahead to the night that awaited her, she felt not fear or doubt, but calm confidence and anticipation. She knew that the transformation she had undergone was complete, and that the steps she would take next would leave an impression that no one could ignore. The night of the gala arrived, and the city lights reflected brightly on the streets, casting a golden glow over the entrance. She stepped out of her car with calm confidence, each movement deliberate and graceful. The dress she wore flowed with elegance, subtle yet striking, reflecting the refinement and power she had cultivated over the months. As she walked toward the venue, people paused to notice, drawn not only by her appearance, but by the aura she carried. Inside, the gala was a scene of opulence and sophistication. Chandeliers sparkled above, and the air was filled with the murmur of conversations, laughter, and the soft sound of music. Guests moved about in polished elegance, yet all energy shifted as she entered. Eyes followed her quietly, some recognizing her immediately, others realizing only after a moment who she was. Whispers spread through the room, a mix of admiration and curiosity. She navigated the crowd with measured grace, offering polite nods, soft smiles, and engaging with individuals in a way that commanded respect without demanding it. Every conversation she joined reflected her intelligence, wit, and insight. People listened, asked questions, and sought her perspective. It became clear that she was no longer the woman who had been publicly betrayed months ago. She had grown, transformed, and emerged as someone impossible to ignore. Across the room, he noticed her. The man who had assumed she would vanish from the public eye froze for a moment, his surprise evident. The magnitude of her presence, the calm power she carried, and the respect she drew from others left him uncertain and uneasy. He had believed his actions had left her weakened, yet she had turned the situation into strength and influence. He watched as she moved through the gala, engaging and impressing, leaving an unmistakable impact on everyone she spoke with. There was no anger in her demeanor, no need for revenge. Her power was quiet, natural, and undeniable. People who had once whispered behind hands now looked at her with admiration. Conversations slowed when she joined, and all attention shifted as she shared insights and engaged with subtle authority. The crowd could feel the transformation that had occurred, the months of effort, resilience, and self-discovery radiating from her. She had arrived not to compete or retaliate, but to demonstrate her own growth, her own presence, and the strength she had cultivated. He realized the room no longer revolved around him. The attention she drew was organic, rooted in her character and accomplishments. His attempts at influence seemed smaller, less effective, and ultimately inconsequential compared to the aura she carried. The whispers about her spread throughout the gala, from group to group. until everyone understood that the woman who had once been publicly humiliated had returned stronger than ever.
Oh.
Some guests were inspired by her courage and perseverance. Others quietly reflected on their own choices, and some simply watched in awe. She continued to navigate the room with calm focus, making connections, sharing ideas, and inspiring admiration. It was clear that her comeback was not about vengeance, but about self-empowerment. She moved toward the area where speeches were, to be given, people parting naturally to allow her passage. Her presence was noted silently by all. She reached the stage when it was her turn to address the crowd. Her voice was calm and steady, yet every word carried weight. She spoke of her work, her achievements, and the journey she had undertaken. She spoke with authenticity and clarity, drawing people into her story without the need for embellishment or drama. The room listened, captivated and responsive. She concluded her speech not with a challenge or confrontation, but with a message of strength, independence, and self-respect. She had reclaimed her space, her dignity, and her influence. People clapped. Many moved to speak with her afterward, to congratulate, connect, and learn from her experiences. He watched silently, unable to approach without being noticed. The moment was hers entirely, and he understood that his past actions held no power here. The gala continued, yet the energy had shifted. The elite in the room recognized her authority, intelligence, and presence. They whispered among themselves, speculated on her next steps, and admired the quiet way she had transformed her life. Every glance she received, every polite nod, every sincere handshake reinforced that she had arrived at a new level of influence. People no longer remembered her as someone humiliated at a past gala, but as someone who had reclaimed her narrative and shaped it into an example of resilience and achievement. She moved through the room with ease, engaging with people she respected, and inspiring those who admired her growth. Every conversation she had reflected her strength, her understanding of the world, and her willingness to embrace opportunities thoughtfully. He remained in the background, reflecting on the reality that he had underestimated her. He saw the respect she commanded, the admiration in others' eyes, and the undeniable power of her presence. She had not sought revenge, yet in proving herself, she had done more than anyone could have anticipated. The night drew on, and she concluded her appearances with grace, leaving behind a lasting impression on all who had witnessed her return. Guests continued to speak about her days afterward, recounting how she carried herself with intelligence, composure, and quiet authority. She walked away from the gala with the same calm confidence that had guided her through every step of her journey since the betrayal. Outside, the city lights greeted her once more, reflecting in puddles from a light rain, and she paused to take a breath, feeling the freedom and empowerment she had earned. Whispers traveled through social circles, wondering who she was, what she was doing, and how she had transformed so completely. She welcomed the attention, not for vanity, but as a reflection of her growth and the work she had done to reclaim her life. With each step forward, she felt more in control. Her career projects began to flourish. Small successes built momentum, and soon opportunities arrived that allowed her talents to shine even further. Collaborations, creative initiatives, and meaningful connections all became part of a life that was no longer defined by anyone else's expectations. She nurtured relationships with people who shared her vision and values, people who recognized her for her abilities and character rather than her former social position. In these connections, she found a sense of belonging and purpose that had been missing in the past. One day, she received an invitation to a major city event, one that was similar in prestige to the gala she had once left in pain. The invitation felt like a test, a chance to step into a space that had once been a place of humiliation and prove to herself and others that she had grown beyond it. She prepared carefully, selecting an outfit that reflected both elegance and subtle authority. She practiced her walk, her posture, and the calm, measured expressions. She had entered the gala with calm anticipation and left having reshaped how the elite viewed her. Having demonstrated her growth and having reclaimed her dignity fully, in that night she had proven that resilience, intelligence, and self-respect were stronger than wealth, status, or social approval. Her journey was far from over, but this night marked a defining moment. She had turned the memory of betrayal into a quiet triumph, leaving the world to recognize her strength and the power of a woman who refused to be diminished. The gala was no longer a place of humiliation. It had become a stage for her resurgence, a moment that would be remembered not for scandal, but for the grace and strength of someone who had walked through pain and emerged victorious in her own right. Days after the gala were filled with reflections and new beginnings. She moved through her life with the calm knowledge that she had proven to herself and to the world that she was strong, capable, and independent. The respect she had earned from the elite and her peers was gratifying. But more important was the quiet satisfaction she felt within. She no longer sought approval or validation from others. Her accomplishments, the work she had done on herself, the respect she had cultivated were enough to affirm her own worth. She spent her mornings planning her projects and goals with care, making decisions that reflected her values and her vision. There was no rush, no external pressure, just a clear focus on building a life that was fulfilling and authentic. People began to approach her for guidance, mentorship, and collaboration. Her reputation for intelligence, composure, determination had spread beyond the gala, and she welcomed these opportunities with thoughtful consideration. Each interaction reinforced her confidence, her sense of purpose, her belief that she could thrive without needing to rely on anyone who had once betrayed her. The man who had humiliated her watched from a distance, struggling to regain relevance or influence over the circles she now moved within. He attempted to reconnect, to insert himself into conversations, and to assert the power he thought he once held. But she no longer responded to his attempts. She had moved beyond anger and resentment, recognizing that her true power lay in her independence, her achievements, and the respect she had earned naturally. Her life had become a reflection of her own choices, a space where she could create, innovate, and inspire. She spent time mentoring young professionals who admired her strength and determination. Sharing her experiences, she guided others to believe in their potential, to act with integrity, and to cultivate their own confidence. She found joy in these moments, in the knowledge that she was making a meaningful impact beyond herself. Friendships she had neglected in the past grew deeper. People who had supported her quietly were now part of her life in more meaningful ways. Conversations were filled with laughter, shared dreams, and mutual respect. She realized that the relationships she nurtured now were stronger because they were grounded in authenticity, not superficial expectations. Professionally, she expanded her projects with skill and foresight. Opportunities that had once seemed distant were now within reach. She carefully balanced ambition with integrity, choosing paths that aligned with her values. Success no longer felt like a race against others, but a reflection of the work she had invested in herself and her ideas. One afternoon, she walked through the city streets, observing life unfolding around her. People hurried past, unaware of the personal transformations that had shaped her journey. Yet she felt a quiet connection to the world, a sense of place and purpose that was deeper than any social recognition. The past betrayal was no longer a shadow, but a stepping stone, a moment that had prompted reflection, growth, and resilience. She allowed herself to imagine the future freely. Plans unfolded in her mind, ideas for projects, personal growth, and meaningful connections. She considered travel, experiences, and learning opportunities that would expand her understanding of the world and her own potential. Nights were filled with quiet routines that nourished her mind and body. She took time for reading, reflection, and creative work. The calm of these evenings reinforced the strength she carried throughout the day, reminding her that her power was rooted in balance, self-respect, and thoughtful action. Occasionally, she encountered reminders of the past, subtle hints in social circles, or mentions from others. She observed them without reaction, understanding that her journey was her own, and that external attempts to provoke or influence her held no weight. Her focus remained on her life, her growth, and the meaningful work she continued to create. She also allowed herself moments of personal joy, moments of laughter, connection, and exploration. She recognized that a life of purpose included room for happiness, curiosity, and experiences that enriched her spirit. Love and friendship were approached with intention, recognizing that healthy relationships required mutual respect, understanding, and shared values. The man who had betrayed her eventually realized that his attempts to reassert influence were futile. She had built a life that was independent of him, a life that reflected her own choices, strengths, and vision. The world had witnessed her resilience, but her satisfaction came from within, from the knowledge that she had reclaimed her narrative and her dignity. Over time, she expanded her projects further, taking on larger responsibilities and exploring new ventures that challenged her skills and creativity. Each success reinforced her confidence and demonstrated the power of perseverance and self-belief. Her achievements inspired others, showing that resilience, intelligence, and determination could transform challenges into opportunities. She continued to engage with the world in meaningful ways, attending events, sharing her insights, and connecting with people who shared her values. Her presence was respected and admired, not because of wealth or social status, but because of the character, integrity, and capability she demonstrated consistently. She often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The pain of the past, the humiliation of the Gala, and the months of quiet rebuilding were all part of the story that shaped her strength. Each step had been intentional, each decision a reflection of her commitment to herself. She understood that true power came not from revenge or recognition, but from knowing her own worth, taking responsibility for her life, and acting with integrity and courage. As she looked toward the future, she felt excitement, curiosity, and anticipation. Opportunities awaited, challenges would arise, but she felt prepared. The lessons learned, the growth achieved, and the resilience developed were tools she carried into every new experience. She had proven that her life could not be defined by betrayal, humiliation, or the opinions of others. Instead, it was defined by her actions, her choices, and her unwavering commitment to herself. And in the quiet moments, when she paused to reflect on the journey, she felt a profound sense of peace. The world had witnessed her strength, but her deepest satisfaction came from knowing that she had faced pain, embraced growth, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. She had reclaimed her life entirely and knew that the best was still ahead. A life full of purpose, independence, and fulfillment, shaped entirely by her own hands and heart. After months of growth, reflection, and hard work, she felt a sense of completeness that had eluded her for years. Life had become a balance of achievement, personal happiness, and meaningful connections. Each day was approached with clarity, purpose, and quiet confidence. She had developed routines that nurtured both mind and body. Her mornings began with reflection and planning, moments that helped her set priorities and maintain focus. Days were filled with projects, collaborations, and opportunities that allowed her creativity and intelligence to flourish. Evenings were quieter, moments to rest, connect with friends, or enjoy simple pleasures that brought her peace and satisfaction. She had become someone who moved through the world intentionally, aware of her impact and presence, yet unburdened by past pain. Her confidence was evident to everyone around her, but it was not arrogance or showiness. It was calm, assured, and grounded in her experiences. The man who had betrayed her watched from a distance, still attempting to assert influence in circles she now commanded respect in. Yet his presence was irrelevant to her. She had learned that true power was not derived from confrontation or attention from others, but from self-awareness, independence, and the ability to act with integrity. News of her achievements spread quietly at first, then more widely. People admired her dedication, her ability to overcome challenges, and the grace with which she carried herself. Invitations came to speak, participate in projects, and mentor others who sought to learn from her journey. She embraced these opportunities with thoughtfulness, focusing on how she could contribute meaningfully rather than seeking recognition or approval. Her personal relationships deepened. Friends who had supported her growth became confidants, partners in creativity, and sources of laughter and joy. She understood that meaningful connections required trust, honesty, and mutual respect. She invested her time and energy carefully, creating a circle of support and inspiration that reinforced her sense of belonging and purpose. Professionally, she continued to expand her ventures. Each project reflected her vision and values, and her ability to execute ideas with skill and thoughtfulness drew admiration. She found fulfillment not just in the success itself, but in the process, the learning, collaboration, and creation. With every step, she reinforced the understanding that her life was defined by her choices, not by past betrayals or the opinions of others. Occasionally, she encountered reminders of the past events, whispers, or old acquaintances, but she observed them without attachment. Her focus remained on what she could build, the experiences she could create, and the influence she could have through her work and character. She no longer measured herself against the man who had once betrayed her. He was a shadow from the past, unable to diminish the life she had built. Her energy was dedicated entirely to her own growth and happiness. One day, she was invited to a prestigious event that brought together leaders, creatives, and influencers from various fields. It was a space where presence, ideas, and reputation all mattered. She prepared with care, not for attention, but to present herself authentically, confidently, and with the grace she had cultivated. At the event, her presence was immediately noticed. She moved through the crowd, engaging in conversations that reflected her intelligence, insight, and character. People sought her perspective, valued her input, and admired the calm confidence she carried. Whispers spread about the remarkable transformation she had undergone. From the humiliation of the past to the strength and poise she now embodied. He attended the same event, noticing her arrival and feeling a mixture of surprise and unease. He realized that she had transcended the situation that had once defined her public image. She no longer needed validation or acknowledgement from him or anyone else. Her achievements, confidence, and relationships were evidence of a life built entirely on her terms. Throughout the evening, she connected with individuals who shared her vision and values. She formed partnerships and collaborations that had the potential to create lasting impact. Her focus was clear, intentional, and unhurried. Every interaction reinforced her authenticity, competence, and influence. She understood that her power lay not in wealth, status, or revenge, but in the consistent application of her skills, integrity, and thoughtful action. As the night progressed, she reflected quietly on how far she had come. From the pain and public betrayal to months of personal growth, learning, and deliberate action. She had transformed not just her circumstances, but herself. Her resilience had become the foundation for a life filled with purpose, independence, and fulfillment. Days continued with a balance of work, personal growth, and meaningful connections. She mentored young professionals, engaged in projects that challenged and inspired her, and nurtured relationships that brought joy and support. Her presence in the professional and social world was felt deeply, not because of status or recognition, but because of her character, competence, and ability to inspire others. Occasionally, she reflected on the journey that had shaped her. The betrayal that had once caused pain now served as a reminder of the strength she possessed and the lessons she had learned. She understood that every challenge could be an opportunity for growth, every setback a chance to develop resilience and clarity. Her life had become a reflection of intentional choices, thoughtful action, and the pursuit of fulfillment on her own terms. Over time, she embraced larger projects and responsibilities, expanding her influence while maintaining the values that guided her growth. Each success reinforced the understanding that her power came from within, rooted in self-awareness, determination, and integrity. She celebrated small victories, connected with people who shared her vision, and allowed herself moments of personal joy. Her life was full, rich with purpose, connection, and a sense of accomplishment that was independent of anyone else's approval. She no longer looked back with regret. The past was a chapter, formative and important, but no longer defining. Her focus was on the present and the future, on the opportunities to create, inspire, and live authentically. In quiet moments, she reflected on the journey, feeling pride in the resilience, courage, and clarity she had cultivated. Her confidence was not loud or boastful, but steady, grounded, and unmistakable. She knew her worth, understood her capabilities, and trusted her judgment. As she looked ahead, she felt anticipation and excitement for what was yet to come. Challenges would arise, opportunities would present themselves, and the world would continue to change. She was ready. Her journey had taught her that true fulfillment came from self-belief, intentional action, and the courage to create a life aligned with her values. And in that understanding, she found peace, strength, and joy. Knowing that her life was truly her own and that she had the power to shape every chapter ahead with wisdom, grace, and confidence,